Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Contrarian Investor Podcast. I'm Tom Wallace, and today I'm joined on the line by the CEO and Chief Liberty Officer of the new social media publishing platform Liberty.me, Mr. Jeffrey Tucker. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me on the line. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Sure. It's really nice to be here. We are really just on the cusp of releasing to a closed beta of the site. We are probably, I would say, 97% finished with the thing. So it's been a long haul. We've been working on it since October, but it's looking very beautiful. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I invited you on the show for two reasons. One of them was a personal reason, actually. I wanted to say thank you for starting Liberty.me. One, because it enabled me to speak to Rick Rule, which was one of my long-term sort of wishes. I always wanted to have a chat with him, and as soon as I saw that perk on Liberty.me, I was like, bang, sign me up.
Cool.
And as a direct result of that, this is now the fifth interview in the podcast series, so it's been a snowball effect, and I just wanted to say thank you for that.
That's great.
Why did you decide to start Liberty.me, and how did it all come about?
Okay, so yeah. Well, I got to tell you that as I look back at it, I'm a little bit terrified at the obsessiveness with which I pursued this goal. It began last spring, and only within the last week has my obsession kind of broken in a way. Like I've begun to realize what I've done in retrospect. I've heard other entrepreneurs talk like this, like they had this dream and they couldn't let go of it, and like only once the thing began to emerge and actually become real did they realize how insane the whole thing was. And so I imagined last April that there were a number of problems in the world that just needed correcting. One was that so many people in the Liberty space were working hard to make their own websites and their own web presences. And they would get into it using Blogger or WordPress and discover that nobody's reading their stuff. Then they would convert their site to a real URL and hire designers and end up spending thousands of dollars and then still publishing and deciding that nobody was paying any attention to them. And they would get discouraged after 6 or 8 months and just kind of move on with their lives and do something else. And it occurred to me that if we actually accumulate our energies, together we can get much higher search engine optimization, get an audience for our work, and collectively in a crowdsourced way get more attention and get the ideas out there. So that was the fundamental idea. And then on top of that, I realized we needed more than just a publishing platform. We needed really a community, so that every single page extracted information from people, not because we want to be nice, but because we actually need each other's ideas. So I wanted Facebook-like functionality there. So we could also have friends, and so that every page on the site would, ask for people's involvement. So, for example, we're distributing a ton of books, hundreds of books, really. But I wanted to not just distribute the book. I wanted to be able to have ongoing discussions about the book so that people could learn from them. So, and then also discuss other things. So I created, as part of the site, very robust forums. Now, most of the forums I've used in the past are very difficult to use and unpleasant slightly. So it was very important when we put the design together to make sure that they were as wonderful as possible and really engaging. So we hired the best conceivable designers to put together a site that was really, truly humane, a forum a setting that really would be a delight to use, which I've never seen before. Well, I think they achieved it. And then also as a part of this, we wanted to have an ongoing news stream so we could actually, there's a lot of work going on in the Liberty world that people never see. I wanted to accumulate that work and kind of put it in as part of the community. And you roll all this into one package, and really what you're looking at is an unprecedented level of functionality for not just websites in Liberty space, but for any website in general. I mean, essentially, nobody's ever achieved something like this before. This fully integrated, multi-function website and application that really does try to create the feel of a conference or a living, breathing city in the digital cloud. So that was the vision. We kicked it off in October, and we had very little time because, of course, there's not enough capital in the world to create something like this, really. So we had to move very fast. But here we are now, middle of March, and we're moving into a closed beta. So it's basically ready. The dream is about to become realized, and I'm super excited about it. I mean, for me personally, I mean, this a site like this and a project like this draws on every experience and talent and longing I've ever had, actually. So for me, it's kind of a funny moment in my life because this is all I've ever really imagined possible. It's only made possible by the technology, which only pretty much came online in 2013.
You've got some pretty high profile people involved in Liberty.me.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you list a few of the people and how did you get all these people together in the one spot in such a short amount of time?
Well, I think the reason we got somebody like you mentioned Rick Rule, but I've got Bob Murphy and Marianne Copenhaver and many other writers in the Liberty space. I mean, very creative people from all over the map, really. I mean, it's a diverse side of Kathy Reisenwitz. It's a very diverse crowd. Many different perspectives, but that's what I wanted. I mean, to me, I'm kind of the mindset that we should be living in a post-guru state of being. Like no one person knows all things, but together we can all know more than we would know independently and separately. So I really wanted a great diversity of people, and that's just the beginning. What you saw on the Indiegogo side is just the beginning. There's a philosophy behind the site, which is that we need to get beyond just thinking about the ideas of liberty and actually start trying to do liberty. And that's an important philosophical shift that I went through because for years I thought, when I was very young, I thought the way forward was through politics. And then as things went on, I got disgruntled with politics, and I thought the only way forward was kind of deep reading, and all that is important. But now I've come to realize that there are ways that we can actually achieve the liberty that we dream of through practical measures in our own lives and through entrepreneurial work and creativity in the real world. And I mean, given that the state doesn't really want to change and probably never will change, the only way that I can see that to really change the world is by taking our own initiative. So that's really what the site is about. It's about taking liberty into our own hands and trying to find ways forward. These ways are slightly difficult to find, but when you find them, you see just the power and the magic that they mean for us in our lives and for the world. I mean, Bitcoin is a good example of that, but there's so many other examples of it. We can actually, through our own initiative, help make the world a freer place. I believe that.
I know it's only early days now, but what's your 5-year vision? Where would you like to see Liberty.me?
Well, so this is actually part of what's fun about Liberty.me is that I don't imagine myself as a central planner. I wanted to create the space and put as much as I knew into it and create all the functionality that could be possible. But mainly, I wanted to extract information from my friends, and from the crowd, and have us all get together and build something that would be surprising and new. So I'm actually like trying not to have a 5-year vision. I want to see what becomes of it because in so many ways the users are the ones that are going to be building the space, and we've done a tremendous amount going into it. So when you first get there, which is in just a couple of weeks, a few weeks, you'll be impressed and amazed. And I think probably it's going to be the ultimate time suck because you're going to spend a day there, or a week there. But what I'm hoping is that the site is going to take an unpredictable direction going forward. I mean, for one thing, as entrepreneurs, we're going to be building the site based on what's most valued by the consumers, which you can't really anticipate in advance. On the other hand, I want the consumers themselves to be responsible for kind of building a world that they like. I mean, like every single user gets their own publishing space, and it's not just a simple blog or something like that, but it's a full installation, website installation. So in some ways, I mean, it's the cheapest possible publishing space. I mean, you can actually build, your own, how do you say it by analogy to the physical world, your own kind of mansion for yourself, within this large community. You can actually do this within Liberty Me. It's actually slightly dazzling and amazing. This functionality, which in code terms is called multi-site. 3-4 years ago, was available, but it was almost unaffordably expensive for the provider. Now, as a result of the spring, it's become available to everybody. So you can actually have literally millions of websites running off a single virtual server. And so we've employed that technology to the benefit of the Liberty community.
You mentioned Bitcoin before. How do you see cryptocurrencies evolving over the next few years?
Well, I mean, Bitcoin has been an inspiration to me, not just as a technology, which I'm very intrigued by. I mean, you have to remember that for like 5 years ago, nobody imagined that the private sector was going to be able to create its own currency. And now you can use it, in daily life. I mean, just yesterday, I bought a plane ticket with Bitcoin. I mean, every time I use it, I'm just like blown away. Like, oh my God, this is so advanced and so wonderful and so much better than national monies. I mean, now that the technological breakthrough has happened, I don't believe that there's any way we're going to stop it. I mean, government regulations can slow it down, serve as a kind of distraction to progress, but ultimately, I think cryptocurrency is going to win out over national money. And for me, this is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for how we should be thinking about the future. I mean, not just forever grumbling about the limitations and the barriers, but to actually think creatively around them. So to invent a new world of liberty so it can become our new reality. I mean, I think it's a very important stage going forward in the liberty agenda.
This is mainly an investment podcast, so I have to ask you, what investments have you excited going forward?
What investments have I what?
What investment classes are you excited about going forward?
Well, of course, I follow a lot of precious metals sites and investment thinkers and stuff like that, and I think that sounds very reasonable to me. Being a libertarian, I tend to, go for the real stuff as opposed to the government created stuff, which may not always be the best short-term decision, but maybe in the long term, that's the best way forward. I have grave doubts about the economic viability of U.S. growth going forward because we're so saddled down with debt and gigantic public infrastructure and heavier taxes and regulations. And the extraordinary thing to me, which I almost can't believe, is that in the midst of this kind of long-running slow growth period, which isn't quite recession, but it's almost as dreadful. We're growing much slower than we should, given the level of population increases. I'm pretty bearish on the American economy in general, but actually like wildly bullish on the emerging markets. I mean, it seems to me this is the way forward. I mean, one thing that's great about these emerging markets is they don't settle down to the same level of infrastructure support that the U.S. has. And we've got infinite amounts of debts and the unfunded liabilities we're going to be paying for, presumably for centuries, if we make it that long. But there's a lot of wonderful economies in the world that are growing at a very, very fast pace that are just killing the U.S. rates of growth. And I think that's where we should be looking. I'm also very interested in technology. One thing that's really important about good investors is that they have a contrarian mentality. I mean, like when everybody's excited about one thing, they get unexcited about it. And then when everybody's putting down some other sector, they start getting interested in it. That's a very difficult way to think. It takes some training and a great deal of intelligence, but that's the way great investors think. And one thing I've noticed about technology ever since the dot-com bust of 1999 is that people are a little bit incredulous towards information technologies. And I think that's generally a mistake, actually. I think this is the way forward. Nobody would have imagined that there would have been a simple little texting app called WhatsApp that would have sold for $18 billion to Facebook, for example. I mean, people predicted the doom of Google, of Amazon, of eBay. I no longer, I don't think it's good or very wise to actually follow the mainstream on this stuff. And we should actually realize that we live in a digital age, and this is our new industrial revolution. And the investments we ought to look to are the ones that are pointing towards the future. And that involves technology, I believe. 3D printing, these kinds of things. As I say, the government can slow them down, but they're not going to stop them. This is our future.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned the mainstream. I'm pretty sure it was Paul Krugman that said that the internet would be dead within 5 years or something. So, yeah, it's probably not good to take their advice.
No.
We've just seen the majority of Crimeans vote to secede from the Ukraine and become part of Russia. I'm not sure if this is going to be a good thing for them, but do you think the trend of secession is going to increase?
Well, in the 20th century, we saw it was very interesting actually. If you look back, after World War One was actually undertaken in the name of determination of nations. I mean, secession from large imperial empires was part of the theme of the First World War. And then immediately after the World War, new empires were created. Democratic empires were carved out by the victors. Those were ultimately unsustainable. We began to see the first cracks of this apparatus start to take place in, I guess, the late 1980s, where there's a secessionist impulse that swept all of the old Soviet empire. I believe the secessionist longing is ultimately not suppressible. I mean, it's always there. It's always underneath the surface of all politics in all places. I mean, peoples who have particular longings for themselves that perceive themselves to be something of a homogeneous group and oppressed by a dominant group are always going to be reaching toward the secessionist solution. It's an imperfect solution in some ways, but I don't believe that there's any point in trying to suppress it. So I think we're going to see ever more of this kind of things. Whether or not that secession leads to joining larger empires, or just complete independence, which is what I would face. Yeah, I believe that secessionism is definitely not just part of the liberal agenda, but as part of our future.
For someone who's just waking up out of the status nightmare or becoming aware or whatever you want to call it, what would be the first book that you'd suggest that they read?
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's a neat question. My answer would probably change depending on the day. But today, I'm really very much in love with Mises's 1929, I believe it was, book. Maybe it's 1927, called Liberalism. And it's a kind of a beautiful book because, and as far as anybody can tell, it's the last statement of sort of 19th century style liberal thinking, and it was written like right before liberalism became like fully corrupted by its unity with the statist project. So you have in this book called Liberalism, just a beautiful view. I mean, he sought to make a fundamental statement of what the old liberal vision is about and how it could be improved and what we should look for. And it's just filled with lovely ideals. They're very challenging and very beautiful, actually. And it's a scientific work, too. But it's also poetic. I love every page of that book. I think it's beautiful. And I think I might recommend that as the very first thing to get an idea of what liberty really means and what it can be for our world.
Jeffrey, where can my listeners find your work?
Well, right now, I'm still writing for, of course, Laissez-Faire Books, where I'm executive editor. I write a lot for the Daily Caller. About 6 months ago, I established a little website called jeffreytucker.me, actually, where nowadays almost everything I write appears there because it all happens too fast and too furiously. So you can actually go there and dig up whatever you want. Now, in a few weeks, I'm going to be exclusively and forever parked at liberty.me. I hope that it's going to be for a very long time. So if you want to get on the mailing list for that, just go to liberty.me and sign up, and we'll take care of you.
No worries. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me on the Contrarian Investor Podcast. I've been speaking with the CEO and Chief Liberty Officer of the new social media publishing platform, liberty.me. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, I'll look forward to launch. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.